protect U.S. assets and allies from missile strikes. Counterforce strategies focus on targeting the adversary's military capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. The U.S. can leverage advanced weapon systems to conduct precision strikes. AGM-86 ALCM. This air-launched cruise missile can travel over 2,400 kilometers or 1,491 miles, delivering a nuclear punch to enemy targets without putting pilots at risk. With a nuclear yield of up to 100 kilotons, the ALCM is a crucial component of the U.S. nuclear triad. B-2 Spirit. With its stealth capabilities, the B-2 can penetrate sophisticated air defenses and deliver nuclear payloads with precision. The B-2 is capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear weapons, making it a versatile platform for strategic strikes. Knowledge is power. The U.S. needs to stay ahead with robust ISR capabilities. RQ-4 Global Hawk UAV. This high-altitude drone provides real-time intelligence on Russian military activities, allowing for informed decision-making. With its ability to fly at altitudes of 60,000 feet and cover vast areas, the Global Hawk ensures that U.S. forces have the latest information at their fingertips. The U.S. is deploying new satellites equipped with advanced sensors to detect missile launches. Imagine a watchful eye in the sky, ready to alert decision-makers at a moment's notice. The Space-Based Infrared System, or SBIRS, is a prime example, providing early warning of missile launches and tracking potential threats. Deterrence is the ultimate goal, and the U.S. must show that it won't back down. The U.S. must continually modernize its nuclear forces to maintain a credible deterrent. The upcoming GBSD will replace the aging Minuteman III missiles, ensuring the U.S. maintains a reliable and survivable ICBM force. The GBSD is designed with modern technologies to enhance its survivability and capability to penetrate enemy defenses. The new Columbia-class submarines will be equipped with advanced SLBMs, keeping the U.S. secure under the waves. With a range of 12,000 kilometers or 7,456 miles and the ability to launch multiple missiles, these submarines are crucial for second strike capabilities. The U.S. could emphasize developing low-yield nuclear weapons to deter Russian tactical nuclear capabilities effectively. The W-76-2, a low-yield variant of the Trident II missile, is a prime example of this strategy. By having flexible response options, the U.S. can deter Russia from using its tactical nuclear weapons without escalating to full-scale nuclear conflict. In a world fraught with nuclear risks, the U.S. must remain vigilant and proactive. Neutralizing Russia's nuclear threats involves a delicate balance of military strategy, technological innovation, and diplomacy. The stakes are high, and the challenges are daunting. But with the right approach, the U.S. can mitigate the risks and foster a more stable world. As China becomes more powerful as a nation, so does its military. This, twinned with the fact that China's allies include other powerful states like Russia, is definitely
All right, y'all. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Just want to say thank y'all for joining in. If y'all new to the channel, thank y'all for hopping in and actually viewing the show. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. If you haven't liked, go ahead and smash that like button too. But and further ado, we got some big news coming up tonight. We have ceasefire broken already with the ship that was being struck by the Navy vessels from the United States. Also, we have news about the ceasefire, which is Iran. Don't look like Iran showing up, so strikes are imminent. So I mean, they could start at any time, but we'll see what happens. We got Pakistan, also Saudi Arabia, asking the United States to hold off on the war and try to do diplomacy before anything else. But and further ado, we'll get to all of that. But before we do that, if you haven't done it yet, like I said before, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button.
Big news out of the Middle East and out of Europe as well. We've seen tonight that the U.S. officials are now warning that an Iranian ship was allegedly carrying Chinese weapons on board. We have very little details, but that is a very big situation happening today. We've also seen that U.S. forces have boarded another Iran-linked ship today, and at this point, we're not sure how many they boarded, but it's apparently a lot. We've also seen that Iran has ordered evacuations in the Gulf states amid attack threats, and we have a lot of news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 48 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments throughout the entirety of the globe, including the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, East Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and the Americas at large. Over the course of the past 48 hours, news has emerged that the Islamic Republic of Iran is now threatening imminent attacks against all Gulf state nations, the United States of America, and the State of Israel as well, making an open threat that multiple nations should evacuate all of their citizens immediately, and all sailors should hop on the nearest lifeboat and abandon ship within the Persian Gulf. As the course of the past 48 hours, news here soon to try and strike and destroy everything within the region. Quite a significant amount of bluster, to say the least, but nevertheless showing that the Iranians are back on the warpath. The Iranians have additionally also claimed that they will not be talking to the United States of America's diplomatic delegation inside of Islamabad in talks that were supposed to be happening here soon. The Iranians have made it exceptionally clear at this point that they do not see talks being necessary any longer, and they will be trying to conduct militant actions here in the near future. On the other hand, the United States of America's president has announced that he is indefinitely extending the ceasefire with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which appears to be imminent attacks against all Gulf state nations not seek the consent or more so the approval of the Islamic Republic of Iran, meaning that while the United States of America is now technically working off of an indefinite ceasefire window, the Islamic Republic of Iran is seeing that its ceasefire that it agreed to is going to be lapsing most likely within the next several hours, or at least the next day. We have also seen that significant flights by the United States Air Force through the airbridge in Europe have continued, suggesting that currently U.S. war planners are forecasting that war will be an inevitable certainty within the region once more. We have also seen that the State of Israel's Air Force has been told that they need to get ready to work longer shifts. As we all understand, the Israeli armed forces do clock in and clock out like a usual job, and for that reason, they are telling them to get ready for overtime with no pay. The ambassador of the United States within Israel as well has also been recalled to Washington, D.C., which may be giving us a larger understanding that conflict is returning, and they're trying to move U.S. embassy staff in Israel out of the way of the incoming fire. We have also seen within the Strait of Hormuz and generally the Indian Ocean that the situation with the United States blockade has continued to grow, as the United States has seized other vessels, and the United States president is now alleging that one of these vessels that has been seized by the U.S. Armed Forces is apparently in possession of some sort of illegal contraband, possibly even weapons parts, that were provided by the People's Republic of China and was attempted to be smuggled into Iran on board the vessel. Currently, we do not have any further information or any further details rather than the allegation made by the president, and that is all we have to work off of at the moment. As the Iranians have made it clear that they will not be negotiating with the United States, and the United States is continuing its blockade against Iranian vessels attempting to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz, the price of Brent crude has skyrocketed and has already surpassed $100 per barrel once again at this very moment in time. We have also heard that in the meantime, the United States of America is also trying to gather intel on one of China's new Liaoning-class aircraft carriers near to the area of the East China Sea. Additionally, news has emerged that the National Security Council, or more so, the United States of America's national security experts and members of the executive staff are apparently meeting in the White House at this moment to discuss the situation in the Middle East and to figure out the next steps forward for the United States of America. Inside of the area of the U.S. Midwest, we have also heard that several E-4 Mercuries, or Doomsday aircraft, have been airborne and appear to be conducting training flights at this time as a part of the United States' ongoing nuclear readiness doctrine. Inside of Europe, we have also seen that due to the significant and worsening oil crisis, Lufthansa, a major air carrier from the Federal Republic of Germany, has announced that they will be canceling 20,000 flights here within the foreseeable future due to the lack of available fuel resources to make these flights an actual reality. stability, showing that the fuel shortages are beginning to physically hit the European Union, and we did expect that one of the first industries that would be hit the hardest would most likely be civil aviation. We have also seen that several Russian aircraft, including a Tu-22 M3 backfire and also several Su-30s, were intercepted by the Swedish and the French today within the Baltic Sea as a part of ongoing NATO air defense exercises and also NATO air defense activities that are being conducted within the Baltic Sea. Meanwhile, Belarus threatened to nuke everyone within the region if they touch Belarus. I don't know what's going up with Lukashenko over the past 3 days, but Lukashenko is wilding out. He threatened that if anyone tries to attack Belarus, they will use the nuclear weapons that Belarus doesn't even have and technically aren't even in their possession to be able to defend their country. Moving us on out of that wild statement, we've also heard that the Ukrainian armed forces are still conducting massive drone attacks on the Russian Federation throughout the entirety of its central and southern regions, most of these targets being within the area of the southern military district of the Russian Federation. A key target that was hit today was the Samara pumping station, a part of a larger pipeline that provides fuel to the port of Tuapse, which is still ablazing and on fire at this moment. We have also heard that a significant military garrison of the Russian Federation in the Rostov Oblast was also hit and caused significant damage today. The Russian Federation has also announced for the 5th time in 4 years that they've taken the Luhansk Oblast. Additionally, we have also seen the Ukrainian armed forces have been inflicting significant casualties onto the Russian Federation's armed forces and have stopped most if not all advances today, with the Russian Federation's armed forces still largely stating through their military bloggers that it is perceived at the moment that the Ukrainians have the tactical advantage along most parts of the front line, and due to this reason, the Russian Federation is not seeing any sizable amounts of gains. As a matter of fact, they are currently seeing territorial losses throughout most of the area of the active front line. But with all of that in mind, we have a lot of news to cover tonight, as many of y'all can tell. Summaries usually aren't about 6 minutes long or 7 minutes long these days, usually, but as y'all can all see, things are starting to ramp up around the world. And we are going to start getting into all of this news, starting with our largest stories first, and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. To be honest with y'all, there is no small story tonight, so it's nothing but major stories. So, moving us on and into our first and largest story of the day, we have been able to hear of significant developments that have been happening between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It does appear that while the United States of America is still attempting to try and conduct some sort of a diplomatic play with the Islamic Republic of Iran and see that the kinetic war is brought to an end and the Strait of Hormuz is reopened without an additional shot being fired, the Iranians have made it incredibly clear that they are comfortable in their position of continuing their naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and as a matter of fact, they would be comfortable, according to their public statements, of continuing the war throughout the entirety of the region. According to a statement that came out today from an Iranian official within the Islamic Republic of Iran, he stated the following. This specific individual is Syed Mohammed Marandi. Everyone should immediately leave the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Sailors on all ships in the Persian Gulf must also prepare to evacuate their ships. This is especially urgent for ships near the Strait of Hormuz, which will be destroyed first. Time is running out. Quite the doomsday warning, I would have to admit, and it certainly does appear that, at least right now, the Islamic Republic of Iran's government officials are beginning to message the words of war, and are starting to make it clear that they are going to be attempting to terrorize the region, including those stranded ships within the Gulf, and also all of our Gulf state allies, with inevitable and significant attacks possibly hitting critical infrastructure that would require the citizens of these nations to be able to flee. As many of y'all know, it is absolutely impossible in the modern day and age to be able to evacuate millions of people within a matter of just a couple of short days, or just over a day, much less the entirety of a sub-region like the Middle East. This claim is more so one to start iterating the sort of terrorism that the Islamic Republic of Iran is quite familiar with, and to sow seeds of fear within the public of the Gulf state nations, and possibly see that that fear starts to further leverage the governments of these Middle Eastern countries to try and put heavier pressure on the United States of America to adhere or to concede to Iranian demands, and see that the Islamic Republic of Iran might be able to try, through that diplomatic play, to put more pressure on the United States to meet the Islamic Republic of Iran's demands. We have also seen that at the same time, the Islamic Republic of Iran has started to make it incredibly clear that they are not going to be continuing to discuss any sort of peace deals with the United States of America. Word came out earlier today that the United States of America was apparently going to be extending the ceasefire indefinitely, according to the President of the United States. And this is the statement from the President's social media account, which largely stated this action. Statement of the President, Donald J. Trump. Based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Azam Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and, in all other respects, remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded, one way or the other. It appears that at least
that sounds like the president's trying to like feed into the idea that there might be some type of internal strife between the Iranian military and the Iranian government. Because notice at the beginning, he said that the government is severely fractured or seriously fractured, and they're not sure really who's in charge of the country. So we've heard reports, or at least rumors, that maybe there is currently a more extreme faction of the military that wants to keep fighting, and the Iranian government might want to negotiate. They may still be a little bit wild with their demands in negotiations, but they at least want to talk. So it seems to be, if you believe the president here, that he's suggesting that might be the case. So that's a bit interesting.
It is fairly interesting, but I would have to say that this statement is most likely not accurate as far as the internal government situation inside of Iran is concerned. To tell you all this for a minute, one of the main things that Imam Khomeini is applauded for within the Islamic regime, who is the Ayatollah who was killed at the very opening strikes that started this war, it was that he made sure that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps would be able to operate off of pre-planned orders, off of eventual circumstances or eventualities that may affect the Islamic Republic of Iran until such time that a central government apparatus was able to be reformed and then start to bring the IRGC and the Iranian armed forces back under their control. So given that in mind, let's go over what we know right now in the public, the situation that we've seen so far, and what we've also seen up until today that will largely lead us to believe that the Iranian government has most likely been reformed to some operational extent. When Imam Khomeini, who was the original Ayatollah of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was killed in the opening strikes, and also a larger amount of top Iranian officials in that meeting were also killed, we would generally assume that most of the government apparatus, or at least the central command apparatus of the Islamic Republic, was most likely destroyed, meaning that from that point on, all of the attacks that followed by the IRGC and the Iranian armed forces were those that were conducted off a decentralized command structure, off of the eventuality planning that had been pioneered by Khomeini. With that in mind, we then saw that as the weeks continued to pass, the Islamic Republic of Iran started to see some sort of emerging command structure within their country. And the clearest indicator of that is that when the original 2-week ceasefire was agreed between the Iranian delegation and the U.S. delegation in Islamabad, which we're still in at this moment right now, all Iranian forces within the country after the last Bravura attack that we saw about 2 weeks ago all stopped firing and have generally started to operate in a very centralized form since then. That is our best indication at the moment right now that the Iranian government does have some sort of centralized control in units and the government are no longer acting in a decentralized form. As far as who is in control of that government, it's unclear, at least to us in the public. The Iranians claim that Mujtaba Khomeini, who is the son of Imam Khomeini, is now the Ayatollah and the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. However, he could just be a figurehead and only the leader in name, and it may actually be commanded by lower officials within the inner circles of the Iranian government, which are the ones that are generally calling the shots right now. I would say that out of everyone that we've publicly seen so far that would definitely be involved in the decisions and actions of Iran at this moment, it is certainly clear that Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, is apparently at some sort of higher levels of discussion and involvement, as it appears that most of his statements, at least as how they have been made so far, have largely been law, and his statements heavily coincide or predicate the actions that the Iranian government takes before they even happen, meaning that Abbas Araghchi is certainly in communication with whoever is in charge of the central government apparatus that is now controlling the military and also most administrative actions inside of the country. This would also give us
It doesn't seem like Mujtaba is getting much respect, really, now that he's gotten this position. You really haven't seen him make any public appearances. He's hiding away, like, pretty much all the time, 24/7, he's hiding away. Nobody's really even sure where he's at. Like, I don't think he's made a single public appearance ever since he took charge, since his father got assassinated by the Israelis and the United States forces. I'm not really sure even where he's at. So, it's kind of hard to lead when you're not even visible. It's kind of a hard thing to do, especially being a new and unproven leader.
It really is. I would actually have to be honest with you. I think that he's still incapacitated at this point, like they originally stated, because from what we've heard, folks, Mujtaba was nearby to the initial attacks that killed Imam Khomeini, who was the former supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And from what we've been able to gather, he was injured significantly in that attack and apparently has had to have a leg amputated and possibly some other additional emergency surgeries conducted to be able to stabilize his condition. If that information is true, he may actually still be in some level of traction or recovery at this moment, and therefore may not be accessible to be able to actually run the country, or much less for that matter, be visible. That would also lead us to believe that once again, Mujtaba Khomeini is not in charge of the Iranian government, but there is definitely some sort of a centralized group that is commanding the Iranian armed forces and is operating as the de facto government inside of Iran right now. With all of this in mind, however, the fact that we're saying that it does appear clear off of our indicators that there certainly is a operational government that has taken charge in Iran, we just don't know who the exact faces and names of that group is, and we've also seen that the Iranians are now threatening another warlike footing, threatening that everyone needs to flee the region because they're about to destroy everything, and in the midst of the United States also extending the ceasefire indefinitely on their own without any request or approval by the Iranians for an additional addendum to the current ceasefire. A lot of people are currently putting in their opinions right now on what's going to be happening soon between the United States and Iran. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so if you've been trying to keep up with us today, it's really hard to actually keep up with what's going on, but here's basically what's been happening so far. The Iranians are not wanting to talk. They have rejected showing up to any peace talks, and the U.S. is trying to set them up, I believe, for tomorrow, but the Iranians have outright rejected to even show up, and they're accusing the United States of trying to set up a ruse, so that way the U.S. can attack their country while they're trying to show up to peace talks. So that's part number one right there. Now Iran is saying that their missiles are ready to fire, and they're warning people to evacuate the Gulf states, and they're also holding like events inside of Tehran, showing that they're going to try to target the oil infrastructure inside the Gulf states yet again. And in the meantime, the U.S. said, let's give Iran a pretty much unsolicited extension of the ceasefire for pretty much no reason. Let's just give them an extension in the midst of all that happening. So it's a little bit hard to follow. It's kind of a wild series of events happening right now. But what do you think, though, about the threats Iran's making and where we stand right now? So 41% said Iran plans to attack the U.S. forces very soon, while 31% said Iran is simply trying to pressure the United States into talking, and 24% said it seems like the usual yapping, and there's not much more out of it than that. And I would say that both sides are about to attack each other. I personally think that this United States talking routine they're trying to do right now, I don't think they actually intend to do that. I think the U.S. is planning on pretty much going in and hammering the hell out of Iran again, and they're simply using these talks as a way to stall for time, basically, while more forces arrive in the region. So I'm with the 41%. I think Iran plans to attack soon, and also I think the U.S. is ready to attack soon as well. Because right now, by the way, we are seeing post after post after post coming out on Truth Social from the United States president, and he is pretty excited right now, to say the least. So I think something's coming. The ceasefire will expire tomorrow, and I think we're still going to see hostilities regardless of what the statements are. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would definitely have to be with 41%. Attacks by Iran and the United States are most likely going to be happening soon. If it happens on a U.S. timetable, it's either going to be happening within the next 24 hours at this point, or I think that this might be a fairly likely option as well. It's going to happen after the markets close in the stock market this weekend, because we've seen that so far, most warlike actions and statements and threats of utter destruction and desolation in Iran are always given on the weekends when the stock market is closed and not able to react immediately to those statements. Whenever the weekdays come around and the stock market is open or close to opening, we generally see that the statements are that of the dove, and we talk about how much peace is great and how great things are going on making peace, when in reality things are as usual pretty much every single day of the week and don't really change a lot. So I'd have to say that right now the United States is probably forecasting that war is inevitable, and I would have a feeling that the Iranians are largely wanting to return to the war, as while we did see that inside of their inland areas the Iranian military was heavily targeted and hit, they still are able to control the Strait of Hormuz. And by continuing an active war, even if they're getting bombed out from the air deep inside of Iran, they're still able to blockade the Hormuz because we haven't challenged their blockade militarily yet. And that then means that due to those two elements, they are able to create fear within the oil markets, which would lead the oil below the price per barrels to be able to skyrocket. So I would largely assume that they're most likely wanting to return to an actual kinetic war, for the reason of causing further panic within the oil markets and also further exacerbating the economic situation that we're finding ourselves in right now to be a significant issue, and still are finding that out right now. But moving us on out of that analysis, and largely my 2 cents on that, it is time for us to move on and down into the area of the Strait of Hormuz, because we have a lot more to talk about than just the Iranian threats today and everything else as far as the indefinite ceasefire that's now been given by the United States. According to some claims by the President of the United States earlier this morning, before he announced the whole indefinite ceasefire, he stated that Iran had violated the ceasefire numerous times, which would suggest that the ceasefire had then collapsed and that we would be returning back to war. It was in about several hours after that we then heard that the ceasefire would then be extended indefinitely. We have also been able to hear that apparently, according to additional statements, according to the New York Times, the vice president's diplomatic trip to Islamabad had been put on hold, according to some U.S. official who spoke to the New York Times. We also were able to hear that apparently there is some rumors at the moment, according to the Wall Street Journal, that the current administration in the United States is considering a financial bailout for the United Arab Emirates over the economic losses sustained from the U.S. war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's becoming fairly clear at this moment, regardless whether this statement is accurate or not, that the Wall Street Journal was able to source, that there is significant economic damage that is beginning to largely pile on top of itself for a larger amount of the Gulf state countries whose primary economic motivator or economic engine is the oil and petroleum industry. From what we've seen so far, while the Western world is still seeing that oil resources are beginning to dwindle due to the significant hole in the supply chain that we're seeing right now because of the blockade in Hormuz, a large amount of these Gulf state nations have literally stopped making money and haven't been able to make any money for about the past month and a half. This is due to the fact that most Middle Eastern states, a lot like some others, like the Russian Federation, are economic monoliths, where the largest amount of their economic activity actually comes from a singular industry, that being the petroleum industry. It does appear that at this moment, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq, which get a significant amount of their income and economic activity from oil exports, are seeing that their economies are significantly suffering, now knowing that basically none of their oil is able to be exported, and not only that, a large amount of their oil fields are beginning to be capped and shut down due to the fact that they just don't have any storage capacity left in the country to keep pumping oil out of the ground and putting it in storage tanks. It does seem that this might be a consideration by the United States of America to try and give a bailout to the United Arab Emirates. That might actually be possible, but at the same time, I would also have to say that this is quite bad if we're getting this idea at the moment right now that the economic situation for our U.S.-aligned allies within the region is so bad that we're having to consider just basically giving them tens of billions of dollars or even hundreds of billions to try and keep their economy afloat. At this point, we're having to treat... Yeah, it's pretty bad. At this point, we're basically having to treat all of these Gulf state nations like China might have to treat Russia at some point in the future and just give them money to try and keep them alive for a little bit longer.
Yeah, and also on top of that, it's like, you know, not to get into our domestic situation, but here in the United States, we just added $1 trillion to our national debt over the last couple of months, which is a record pace ever since the pandemic happened. So, I mean, we're not exactly in what you'd call a good fiscal situation here in the United States. So for us to have to start bailing out entire countries like the UAE, if that report turns out to be the case, I mean, that's certainly not a position that the U.S. should be in right now, because we need to bail out ourselves, and there's nobody there to bail us out. So, you know, that's not a good position.
Also, I also just saw someone in the chat, Matthew, say something pretty interesting. Let's use this statement here for some further extrapolation. Someone said, "Wow, this is a mess." And here we are. John Morton said, "Iran has no government to negotiate with. Half the world is out of oil. What the hell are we doing?" And that's a great question, because if you think about it, folks, if the president's statement is correct and contradictory to our belief here on the channel that the Iranians do have a centralized and operational government, let's take the president's statements at face value that they do not have a centralized government that we can actually talk to and negotiate with. Well, why in the world are we going to wait and let them chokehold us indefinitely with a blockade on the Hormuz until they eventually get a government back together? Why in the world would we wait? How long would we have to wait? Would that be months? Would that be a year? Would that be several years? How long would that be? And we can't wait that long. No matter the answer, even if it's just a couple of months, we can't wait that long. This is causing irreparable damage to the global oil industry. Not only that, to the global economy, especially here within the Western sphere of influence. We can't wait for the Iranians to get a government back up and running to where we can then negotiate with them. If that is what we're waiting for, then we should just completely stop talking with the Islamic Republic of Iran and conduct significant attacks against the Iranian forces that are blockading the Strait of Hormuz and reopen it. Because we literally can't wait that long for them to get a government operational if those claims are true. But at the moment right now, a lot of people are talking about this very situation, as the United States is trying to negotiate some sort of a deal with the Iranians from what we've heard. That's why the ceasefire has now been extended indefinitely, unilaterally by the United States. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so right now you can see that the U.S. is saying, at least in their own words, that the reason why they're giving a unilateral extension of the ceasefire is because they still believe, in at least their allegations, that it is possible to negotiate a better deal with Iran than the JCPOA, which was widely criticized and also extremely criticized by the current president. So is it even possible to reach a deal better than the JCPOA or even equivalent to it? Is that even possible at this point? 69% said no, a deal is not viable at this point, while 13% said it depends on Iran's next move, and 12% said yes, it is still possible. And here's my thing. I see a lot of people in the chat saying, well, why is the U.S. negotiating with terrorists? I would tend to agree with that because in this case right here, I mean, number one, the Iranian regime is a terrorist regime. We have to acknowledge that first. Number two, if you try to make a deal with these people, they're not going to adhere to it. That was the problem with the JCPOA. They were not adhering to the enforcement statutes in that agreement. They would not let the nuclear investigators into the place to inspect their nuclear sites. And then we found out later, well, they were violating the hell out of that deal the entire time, and we just handed Iran a whole bunch of leverage and we got nothing out of it. So trying to negotiate another deal with basically the more extreme version of Ayatollah Khamenei, who's his son, who's currently in charge, that sounds like a terrible idea because it's literally a worse position than we were in with the JCPOA. So I don't think a deal is viable. Also, on top of that, it's like, I mean, Iran's already made it perfectly clear they are not going to be backing off any of their claims. They just came out in the last 24 to 48 hours and said that they were never going to let the Strait of Hormuz go, which right now is the number one thing we need reopened is the Strait of Hormuz. So that pretty much takes talking off the table by itself, taking everything else out of the equation. So, I mean, a deal is not possible. That's why I think the U.S. is stalling. I think they're using these talks as a way to keep rearming themselves, and then they're going to launch a very large attack, would be my guess, because anything outside of that is just pure insanity at this point. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm also with the overwhelming majority of people. A deal clearly is not viable. I do not know what the obsession is in the U.S. government about trying to brag about how great deal making is when they really can never make any deal stick ever or even get to the point of making a deal. We cannot make a deal with terrorists. It is an unacceptable moral position to take that we would ever let a terrorist group like the Islamic regime be legitimized to the point that we would make a deal with them. It is also one that would be on unstable ground even if we overcame that moral or sort of a objective obstacle, because then the Iranians would never follow through with it because they're terrorists. On top of that, we also know that even if the Islamic regime put forward a error that they were following along with whatever agreement they made, we can be guaranteed, because of the example of the JCPOA, that they are going to do anything and everything to pretend like they're adhering to a deal while circumventing it the entire time. It's an absolute waste to try and make a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And not only that, we then have to go back to what the president's already said today. We can't even make a deal with them because there's nobody, according to the president, that is actually in control of the entire country to make a deal with. And also another thing that I have to say, folks, is that this is why, and you know, not to go back to the very beginning of the whole war, but this is why you generally don't go and wipe out the centralized government that's in charge of a country on minute one of a war, because then you might end up having a problem like this to where nobody's actually in charge of the country, technically, to be able to negotiate and then work off of a position of what the country's going to do. If Khamenei was still there, the bastard that he is, and he was still alive right now, technically the entire Iranian government would still be oriented around him. So then at that point, we would be able to get a clear answer as to whether they're willing to agree to anything or not, and then we could continue our military actions against them if they're not willing to make a deal, and in them if they are willing to make a deal. And we would have a solidified framework to work with at that point as to what the Iranian government is doing. Instead, we killed basically everybody who was in charge of the Iranian government at the very start of the war, and here and right now we're claiming that we don't even know who was in charge of Iran to be able to negotiate a deal. This is why, folks, I was saying at the beginning of the war, you know, maybe, like, also, this is why I was saying this with Maduro as well, maybe it's not a good idea to kind of, like, half-ass, like, overthrowing a government, like, just nabbing one dude, or, you know, just bombing a whole bunch of important people in Iran, because then at that point, we're not really achieving much of anything, and not only that, we could be confusing the situation later, and that's apparently what we've done at this point. And now the issue is, folks, we have smashed this thing to pieces, and now we're saying that none of these pieces have been able to glue the others together to it, to be able to actually talk to us. We can't wait for them to glue themselves back together. We have to do something to get the Strait of Hormuz closed. Right now, in some European countries like Germany, Lufthansa is having to slash a whole bunch of its flights for the foreseeable future because there's just not enough fuel to run them. And that's going to end up boiling down to where they just don't have any fuel to run hardly at all. That's going to start happening across every industry. We can't sit there and wait for that to happen in all of our allied nations, which is going to cause economic depressions over there, which is going to economically drag us down over here. It's just impossible. We have to start conducting military actions to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, because if we do not, we are going to be seeing that we will be waiting forever, and the entire time that we're waiting for something to happen, our economy is going down the tubes every single week. It's a horrendous position. But moving us on out of that and back into our news out of the Strait of Hormuz, we have also been able to hear that apparently the U.S. Treasury has put out a report today. And according to the U.S. Treasury, they announced that 14 entities designated in the previous reported Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctions were involved in Iran's ballistic missile and unmanned aerial vehicle production process. This includes the designated Mahan Air aircraft, which were used to transport weapons for the Iranian regime. So it does appear that we're getting some sort of an understanding that the Treasury has put out a report today on additional companies that are helping the Islamic Republic of Iran with their ongoing war effort. We have also seen as well that, according to the information we have, the strait is still closed today, which is quite obvious. As a result of all of this that has happened, at least on our end, and this is before we hardly get into what the Iranians have claimed today, which is really starting to get the markets panicked from what we can tell, oil prices are already skyrocketing again. This is what they did today. They jumped up about $5 to $6 a barrel to over $100 per barrel for Brent crude. Really quickly to check on the WTI crude prices, which I'll get for y'all right here. WTI crude is actually sitting at a fairly manageable level, and while it did see a somewhat minor spike today, it's sitting around $90 a barrel. Certainly not optimal, but doing a lot better than the Brent crude prices, which are being heavily affected by the ongoing crisis and situation that we're seeing right now. The Iranians have also made it clear, according to their foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, that they're interpreting the blockading of Iranian ports as an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking a commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. It was breaking a blockade, so, you know, that kind of is a non-sequitur point. But Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions, how to defend its interest, and how to resist bullying. Meanwhile, they bully us by continuing to close the strait and then pretending like they don't have a centralized government that's calling the shots. Really a smart one right there. But we also have been able to hear up inside of Tehran a great deal more of the Iranian statements and the Iranian position that has been taken today, which will be affecting their foreign policy position and analysis well into the future. The Iranians did clarify today, according to Tasnim news agency, that the Iranians did not request a ceasefire extension, which the United States unilaterally announced today. That means that the Iranians will not be adhering to this indefinite ceasefire, at least according to their current claims right now. The president, and here's the thing, folks, the president can announce that U.S. forces won't pop a shot at Iran for however long we want. But the problem is that if we don't talk to the Iranians and have them agree to not pop a shot at us as well indefinitely, that means that we didn't actually agree to a ceasefire or a bilateral ceasefire. What we have done is a unilateral ceasefire. That means that U.S. forces aren't going to shoot at Iran until they shoot at us, meaning that right now, at least off of what we would understand the current foreign policy situation to be, the ball is in Iran's court to restart this conflict. We have also seen as well that the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stated the following today: "On my personal behalf and on behalf of Field Marshal Syed Asim Munir, I sincerely thank the President for graciously accepting our request to extend the ceasefire to allow ongoing diplomatic efforts to take their course. With the trust and confidence reposed in, Pakistan shall continue its earnest efforts for negotiated settlement of the conflict. I sincerely hope that both sides will continue to observe the ceasefire and be able to conclude a comprehensive peace deal during the second round of talks scheduled at Islamabad for a permanent end to the conflict." I have a feeling that Shehbaz Sharif's words are falling on deaf ears at this point, because the Iranians have made it incredibly clear they're not going to adhere to an indefinite extension, and not only that, they're getting ready to start the war all over again. The Iranians did reiterate once again, according to Tasnim News Agency, which put out the statement today, that Iran's negotiating team has informed the American side through the Pakistani mediators that it will not attend negotiations on Wednesday. So far, we have not seen any Iranian or U.S. aircraft arrive in Islamabad once more to continue any rounds of talks. We've also heard that the Iranian IRGC stated that their missiles are ready for launch today, once again making it incredibly clear that they are on the very verge of conducting significant attacks throughout the region once more. The Iranians then further reiterated that the president's ceasefire extension means nothing, and the losing side cannot dictate terms. That was according to an advisor to Iran's parliament speaker, who issued that statement today. Once again making it exceptionally clear that the current public Iranian position is that they will not be adhering to any sort of a unilateral extension from the U.S.'s end of a ceasefire. They also then reiterated once more, just in case if this was not clear yet, that the missiles are ready for launch and they will not be attending any negotiations whatsoever. They then warned of attacks. This was one of our most recent statements before we went on air, that the Islamic regime's Khatam al-Anbiya command says forces are at 100% readiness, of whatever's left of them, warning any attack will trigger immediate strikes on pre-designated targets and a harsher lesson, quote-unquote, for the United States and Israel, making it incredibly clear that the Iranian central government is putting out statements that show that they are back in a warlike mindset and a wartime footing, preparing for either preemptive or counterattacks to U.S. attacks or strikes, or to start off the war once more by conducting offensive strikes of their own against us and our Gulf state allies. In Tehran today, they also pulled off a little parade, which appears to have shown off some of the larger missiles like the Khorramshahr 4 within a nighttime parade within the streets of Tehran, which we actually have some footage of right here. We can see that a large number of pro-regime citizens have come out to apparently wave Iranian flags around a Khorramshahr 4, aka the Yellow Crayola.
Yeah, really. It's like the big Crayola on the thing. Also, by the way, how many of these people are paid actors and how many are actual citizens out here, I wonder?
They're probably all paid, or they probably were told by their employers, you have to go show up to this thing or else you're fired. Because that's what they actually do in Russia, is that they tell all of their government workers, hey, by the way, there's a Putin rally coming, so y'all all got to be there, and we're going to make sure to take attendance. If you're not there, you're going to be fired. So a lot of these people might just be government officials that have been told the same thing like people are told in Russia.
Yeah, it could be. And also, by the way, you said that was a mock-up of the missile, or is that a real one right there?
Oh, no, that's a legitimate real missile on a TEL.
Oh, well, there's one of them. Well, at least we know the location of this one, at least. There's one that you guys can start with right there.
We can put money on it, folks, that this Khorramshahr is right there. We're very sure of it. Not because of, any intelligence or anything. It's just that it's literally on a video right here in the middle of Tehran. So we do know of that one, at least. We also got to see an additional clip as well of the TEL in the stowed and transport configuration, apparently carrying a Goddard 110, showing that they've actually whipped out a decent variety of their intermediate range and short range ballistic missiles for this little nighttime parade that they just conducted. When you see these guys up here waving around AKs, Apparently they're trying to film a rap video, is what I heard, like a rap music video. But you know, that's just the word on the street. We can also clearly tell, folks, as well, just to make this incredibly clear, that while the Iranian government is not in charge of anything, because we're claiming that they don't have a centralized government, it is obvious to tell everyone, clearly obvious, that this is a dual-use good right here. This is used for humanitarian and wartime purposes. And we all know that this right here is a little morale booster and also a part of public gatherings and cultural enrichment, which clearly makes this a humanitarian object without doubt. We also know that it can be used to be able to be fired at our forces and our boys right now in the Middle East, or it could be fired at Israel or any Gulf state allies, making it a military weapon as well. You know what? Scratch that, folks. It's clearly humanitarian. This is obviously only for cultural enrichment, and any sort of a suggestion that this could be used as a physical weapon is just completely unabassedly false. I mean, obviously, the Iranians or the Islamic regime is a peaceful government, and they would never produce weapons of war on a scale that has been untold, at least in terms of missile weaponry, to be able to try and conduct acts of terror throughout the region. That would be obviously unheard of. Cultural enrichment is the only use of this system. But moving us on out of this nighttime parade and my humongous amount of sarcasm on that parade as well, it is obvious that the Iranians are still on a wartime footing. Outside of all of that, the United States then made an announcement today, a fairly vague one, but a significant allegation that appears to be suggesting that the People's Republic of China may have been trying to provide some form of military equipment or military parts and components to be able to help the Islamic Republic of Iran either further defend itself against U.S. attacks, or to be able to produce greater amounts of weaponry to conduct offensive attacks against the United States of America and our allies within the region. We did hear that the U.S. President voiced surprise that a vessel attempted, I'm trying to skip some of the parts that we can't say on there, attempted to run the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. According to a direct statement that was made to CNBC earlier this morning, he caught a ship yesterday that had some things on it, which wasn't very nice. A gift from China, perhaps. I don't know. But I was a little surprised.
Man, I'll tell you what, gotta look out for them big things on those ships. I tell you what, gotta look out for that. Not very nice. That's very vague, by the way. I wonder why he's choosing to be so vague. Are they trying to simply not create a huge escalation with China, or what? No, or are they being vague because maybe they're not wanting to really admit what they found on the ship? And also, they didn't even name what ship they found it on. We're having to kind of take a guess at what ship they're talking about here, because we don't know which one they're talking about. He didn't name the ship, so. Very, very odd. Very odd.
I know why it was made that way. You want to know why?
He's trying to avoid World War III, I would assume.
No, that upcoming trip to China. That's it. That's probably it. That's why it was so vague, so that way we wouldn't go, China is providing weapons of war to the Islamic Republic of Iran, clearly supporting an enemy of the United States. Let's just gloss it over so that way I can go to China. It's like, if they're providing weapons of war, I think we ought to just be upfront about that and say, you know what, we're canceling our trip to China due to this new information that we just got from the Marines that we're inspecting whatever vessel we've just seized. I mean, to me, I feel like that would be fairly sort of an obvious sort of an action to take, because if the People's Republic of China is militarily supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran, then we should not have any intention of conducting diplomatic dialogue with the Chinese, and therefore the upcoming talks should be canceled. That would be the clear, obvious thing to do, because that statement is vaguely saying there was definitely some sort of contraband that the Chinese were sending to Iran, and it's obviously not cocaine, so it's most likely weapons, and they're supporting an enemy of the United States. We shouldn't be engaging in dialogue with these people. The visit to China is canceled. We're going to go visit Taiwan instead. Maybe we should do something like that. That's what I feel like would be appropriate, considering that China is a sworn enemy of the Republic. But moving us on from that, a lot of people are talking about this very situation and the very vague allegation that was made that the Chinese put a big thing on that ship and we found it today. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so we don't know very much about it, but I think you can kind of get an idea of what the president's probably referring to here without him saying it, in precise wordage. He's using the very vague vocabulary here to describe this. But apparently some ship that was seized near Iran apparently had some vangs on it, possibly from China. They said possibly a gift from China. So what are your thoughts? 66% said it sounds like China got caught sending something, and the only thing they'd pretty much be sending is probably weapons. 23% said it sounds too vague to know anything, and 7% said it's a pressure tactic on China to get them to back off. And I would say that we've been saying for a while that China's been sending weapons to Iran. It's been, documented in several different reports that have been out there. But the U.S. has generally stopped short of acknowledging that China's sending weapons. They keep trying to pretend like Xi is not involved in a proxy war inside of Iran, but we know that he is. Xi Jinping's definitely involved, and the Chinese government is supplying intelligence, weapons, etc. To the Iranians. And obviously, it's not in the wide open because they keep it secret. It's not going to be like advertised on a billboard. But we now see that apparently when the Marines boarded some ship that was seized near Iran, they found some stuff on it, most likely weapons and containers. That's probably what they found. And I would say the U.S. might have had a tip-off about this because if y'all recall, when a couple of these Iranian ships were seized, what was the first thing the U.S. did when they seized it? They sent in the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit to board the ship and start searching all the containers on those ships. That seems a little bit odd to me, unless they knew something was probably on that ship that wasn't supposed to be there. So I would say they probably were tipped off. They jumped on the ship to actually expose the fact that China was sending weapons. They found out it was, and now the U.S. is having to make a big decision. Do they publicly out the situation directly and make a big deal about it, or do they tamp it down like they're currently doing and avoid causing a direct conflict with China? Because if the U.S. directly acknowledges it, then we're going to possibly be looking at a conflict between the U.S. and China, which could turn pretty ugly. So, I'm with the 66%. I think they got caught. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the Chinese definitely did get caught sending some form of contraband to the Iranians. Now, what that is, it could be anything. It could be an air defense radar. It could be components to produce missiles with. It could be solid rocket fuel. It could be anything, but it's definitely something that was going to be used either to produce a weapon or it was a completed system that would support pre-existing weapon systems inside of Iran. It is some form of contraband to that degree. I've seen some people in the chat saying something, though, and this is an interesting claim, but I have to give a counter to it, that because the United States is so heavily economically intertwined, like we say here on this channel, the U.S. president cannot cancel talks with China, but that would be a little bit false, because if we cancel the talks with China, nothing happens. Like the Chinese are obviously not going to put a 190% tariff on us because that would economically destroy them, much like it would destroy us. All these talks amount to, folks, of going over to China and, meandering around Beijing. It's a nice photo op. And only positive things can come out of it as far as growing relations with the communist Chinese. So we could either, agree to opening up further trade with the Chinese, which would be horrendous, as that's generally going against the kind of framework that we're working with the Chinese at this point, which is slowly mitigating our economic involvement with them and then having everyone who offshore to China offshore elsewhere, removing most of our economic interests with the Chinese out of their country. And so generally, even visiting China wouldn't produce anything beneficial for our larger long-term strategic framework. If we cancel the talks, however, nothing happens. There is no meeting with the Chinese. There is no, de-thawing of relations that may lead to increased cooperation with us and China. And they're also not going to conduct any sort of reciprocal or sort of retaliatory action if the talks were canceled. We just cancel the talks so that way we do not put forward the message that while China is giving weapons to Iran to kill our very own men and women who are serving in the armed forces right now, that we're going to go and visit Xi Jinping and go get all chummy with him while he's trying to help another country kill our people. That's generally the message that we would want to send. And you don't have to go any farther than that. You just have to make the statement, looks clearly like the Chinese were giving weapons to Iran. Because of this, we don't really feel it's appropriate to go over and visit China right now. It's fairly neutral. It's not creating any sort of a tense situation, but it's also making it clear that we have boundaries as a nation. And we're not going to go visit and chum up with a nation that is trying to get our armed forces killed in the Middle East right now. I think that's clearly what we should be doing. But apparently our priorities must lie elsewhere, because that's my position, looking out for the best interest of the Republic and having some common respect for the citizenry. But apparently that sort of a thing is not that much in vogue these days, I suppose. But moving us on out of that development, we have also seen that the United States of America's Department of Defense did issue footage today showing that the motor tanker Tiffany was also apparently seized today as well for sanctions evasion, and also being on the sanctions registry for the United States of America for, at some point, loading up oil and then transporting it from Iran, I suppose, to the People's Republic of China. And there they are, boarding the tanker and moving towards the
very
bridge.
orange tanker. Safety first, they say.
Safety first. That's what I've been saying for 25 years. And so when I say run the blockade, you run the blockade. Man, man, I tell you, that thing's got that BNSF orange on that thing. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it really does.
But still, it is another tanker seized, and at the moment we've heard that there may have been other tankers that have been seized over the course of the day. It's just that sadly we don't have any video or picture evidence yet of that to be able to show and to be able to report. Moving us on out of that, all off on a sideshow, we've seen that a significant amount of reconnaissance activity has been conducted by the U.S. Air Force and the Navy today, including an RC-135U, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon, pictured here, and also a Japanese AWACS aircraft that were all within the same area of the East China Sea. The reason why they were there is because we're trying to get more information on this thing, which is China's new Liaoning class nuclear, I believe this one is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. This thing is largely working a lot off of the modified Kuznetsov design. It is a Type 003 class aircraft carrier of the People's Republic of China. And while it generally has the same sort of aircraft complement and combat capabilities, it is believed that the Chinese may have made significant modifications to their original modified Kuznetsov design that will make this aircraft carrier a little bit more potent and will also make it capable of conducting longer duration and longer distance missions for the People's Republic of China, meaning that they're starting to get a lot closer to being able to conduct global power projection with a carrier, at least one carrier strike group. That won't really mean much, at least for China in the short term, as far as their strategic outlook is concerned, as this Liaoning aircraft carrier is generally only capable of carrying about 27 airframes. That is about a third of what a U.S. supercarrier is able to carry, like the Ford class or the Nimitz class. On top of that, China also doesn't have a large enough amount of destroyers and also enough naval support and auxiliary bases and auxiliary vessels to be able to support significant global operations for this sort of a carrier group, meaning that while in technicality this thing may be able to conduct global operations, it would not be able to see that any of its carrier strike groups or escorts would be able to follow along with it, and also its resupply and auxiliary support forces in the background that would keep this thing out at sea for a while are generally also non-existent to that capacity as well. So China is definitely trying to make steps, probably over the next decade, to getting to being able to field global carrier strike groups a lot like the United States does. And this is a step in that direction, but it doesn't mean that they'll be capable of doing that probably for the next 5 years. They certainly will be able to...
Also, are you sure that this is a nuclear-powered one? Because I'm reading here, and it looks like it might not be nuclear-powered, actually.
One second, I want to make sure, because I was told... Let's see here. I was told that at some point it might be... So, the propulsion on this thing is steam turbines. That sounds like it might be. And I want to make sure here really quickly. Let's see. It's the second carrier for launching the first of its kind aircraft carrier. So it uses the electromagnetic catapults, and I'm trying to see if it has what it has for propulsion. Okay, so I am incorrect. This thing actually does use diesel generators to produce steam for steam turbines. So it generally is working still off of the Type 002's modified Kuznetsov design in that regard. But I heard that at some point China was working somewhere in the pipe of having some form of nuclear propulsion, but apparently I've got the two stories mixed up and just assumed that that was the Type 003. The Type 003 is not nuclear powered. Need to make
And that is the news for the night, y'all. I hope y'all got caught up in what's going on. We will be keeping a close eye on this situation. We will see what China says, and we will see what well, let's go through the poll. We got 60% says we should bomb their energy sector. 20% says they think China will get involved, and 20% says they don't know. But anyways, I just want to say thank y'all for subscribing. If y'all new for dropping in, if this is later on down the road, y'all just drop it in, just check out, see what happened in history of news or whatever.